Hello again. Welcome back to our journaling exercises. So, this week in class, we're considering the cutaneous senses. So, that's what we colloquially would call the sense of touch, right? Which, of course, there's actually a lot of different sensations that go into the skin senses, and that's not even mentioning other body senses that we have. So we get sensations from our muscles, for example. We get sensations inside our internal organs and those kinds of things. But in class, we're focusing on the skin-based sensations, and even there's just so many different dimensions that it's hard to pick just one thing to focus on. So before we get to today's journaling activity, I just want to encourage you, as we're learning about different aspects of cutaneous senses, to just try to notice some of these different things in daily life and try to appreciate them. For this journaling activity, I actually want to engage our imagination a little bit in relation to the cutaneous senses, and particularly in terms of how we locate our cutaneous senses in our bodies. So what do I mean by that? If I'm just going to reflect a little bit on the different senses from my perspective, and one of the things that I notice about my senses is that they can be a little bit different in terms of where it feels like the sensations are located, like sort of where they live. So for example, with vision, my eyes are up here on my head, and the experience of seeing things is kind of like being up in a little watchtower, right? And I can, from up here, I can see out my window, and there happens to be snow falling, and I can see cars driving on the road out there, and I can see things that are around in my office space. And so the things that I'm observing are all out there, but the feeling that I have of what it's like to see them kind of lives in my head, if that makes sense. At least that's how I kind of experience it, and I'm assuming that I'm not probably that different than you in that. But if I contrast that with the cutaneous senses, right? So like my hands feel a little bit cold right now. Or if something happens, like somebody were to step on my toe, right? That, it's not just that I know that the thing happened in that. So like with vision, I can know that something happened in a different place, but I feel like the feeling of it is still living up here. But with touch, the feeling feels like it's happening in that body part. Does it feel that way to you? I'd be interested to hear from you about that, because that's kind of how it feels to me. Is like somebody steps on my toe, I feel it. The feeling feels like it's in my toe. The interesting thing, though, there's many interesting things, but one interesting thing is that in some sense it can't really be true, can it? That the sensation is in my toe, because I know that the feeling that I have must be based on the sensory signals that are coming from the skin in my toe, traveling to my brain, and being interpreted there. And one of the things that we're learning about in class with respect to cutaneous senses is that there's actually an area in the cerebral cortex that maps out the signals that are coming in from the body in such a way that it's possible you can poke an electrode into that map in a certain spot and make somebody feel, for example, like their hand is being touched, and the sensation feels like it's in the hand. So the feeling of something happening in part of my body is, at least partly, based on the body map that I have in my brain. And of course, most of the time, the body map in my brain probably represents my body somewhat accurately, or at least it's interpreting actual signals from the right body parts, so that the part in my brain map of my body, the hand area is really getting signals from my hand and so forth. But it's actually possible for there to be a mismatch between the body parts and the brain's body map. And so, for instance, that's probably what happens when a person whose body has changed because of having a limb be amputated can still feel sensations in the body part that's not there. So if many people who, for example, would have an arm amputated would have an experience of feeling sensations in the arm, even though the arm isn't there. So there's just empty space, but to the person it feels like the arm is there. That's called phantom limb. Sometimes it can be pain. It can be phantom limb pain. There's subtler ways that these body maps can be flexible. There's a famous illusion where it's possible to kind of trick your brain or your mind into feeling sensations in a fake hand. It's called the rubber hand illusion. We also know the body map is flexible. Like you can get a specific, if you have a lot of sensory experience with a certain body part, you can cause it to take over more of the map and like grow its area on the map. And there's just to give more examples, there's situations where people may stop recognizing parts of their body as belonging to them. Almost kind of the flip side of the phantom limb situation, where you still have the body part, but you don't consider it to be your body part. So, okay, getting back to the journaling activity, we have some flexibility in this way that we can feel the feelings of our bodies in those parts. So I want to take advantage of this to do a little bit of imagining of what it would be like to feel what another person feels in their body. So the job I have for you for this journaling exercise is go to a public place of some kind, out in the open where there's people, and you can observe somebody without maybe necessarily them noticing it, or you don't want to make anybody uncomfortable or invade their privacy or anything, right? But just to be able to people watch a little bit. And in this place, if you can try to imagine yourself for a few minutes actually being in the body of a person that you can see and observe. So noticing things about what that would be like in your imagination, of course. The way they're sitting or standing or moving around, like what might that feel like from a first person perspective? The kinds of things that they're touching or interacting with. What would it be like, maybe hypothetically, if that person has pain in their body? What could that feel like? I mean, not that you would know whether they really have pain or not, but you could imagine what it would be like if there was pain in that person's body. Okay, so just trying to put yourself in the body of another person. Just think about what that experience could feel like. just as an exercise in this flexibility that we have of the way that we think about how our cutaneous senses are located. Now, additional place you could go with this, okay? This is optional if you want to do a little bit more of this kind of reflection. In addition to observing another person, what would happen if you observe an animal for a few minutes and try to imagine what it might feel like to be living in that animal's body in the present moment? All right, so, maybe out around campus, or if you have a pet, you could observe this animal for a few minutes, see the kind of things that it's interacting with, and the types of body parts that it has that may be different than your own body parts. But what do we feel like to have those body parts? And what might it feel like to be in the body of that creature and feeling its sense of touch? I hope that makes sense. Once you've done the observation of a person and possibly the observation of an animal, write out just, some thoughts that you had about your ability to imagine another's cutaneous senses, and how that ability might enrich or inform your experience of your own sense of touch. Just to give you a little bit of my own spin on this to stimulate maybe your thoughts on it. Something that I kind of wonder about is whether our ability as humans to empathize with others is in some way connected to this flexibility that we have about our sense of touch and the thinking about our map of our body. Like, for example, how we have the saying about that if you want to understand somebody else, you should walk a mile in their shoes, right? It's a very tactile kind of metaphor. So maybe it's not a coincidence that the metaphor is about the sense of touch, because we have this kind of mental flexibility with touch where you can kind of like really think about putting yourself into that body in a way that, with vision, it's not as natural. Like, we talk about seeing things from somebody else's point of view, but it's sort of like, well, yeah, if I went over and looked at it from that angle, I would see a different thing. It's not as much like you're really in the person's body and like mapping their feelings in the same way. So that's just some of my own evidence-free musings, but I'm looking forward to reading your thoughts on this as well, so I hope you have fun with it.